No matter what you need, don't worry, we can get it fixed. I'm here to spread truth. I'm here to spread light. We can talk about it all night until we get it right. All right, we'll try this one more time. You have to love technology. It's just amazing. I want to help you dream. That's always in my dream. Let's grow together. Let's learn together. Hot topics all day. Hey, Jackie. You guys are awesome for being able to stick with me. Hey. What's up, y'all? Jackie, so our engagement activity of the night is if you can do anything, and I mean anything. Hey, Shoshana. Professionally, right? Money's not an option. The legality of it's not an option. You can do anything in the world professionally. What would you do?
All right, can you hear me now?
All right, we're good. Yeah, as soon as I tried to invite you on that second video, the whole thing crashed. But Facebook has been acting weird the past month with my video with our live. So
it's probably the iPhone. It's all good. It's all good.
First of all, well, we're not going to the divisiveness in the Black community. Remember?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's a little Apple thing I got against Apple. It's all good.
I hate you so much. Okay. I don't even remember where we were left off. Trauma-informed care, maybe?
Yes, you were talking about trauma-informed care, and I was just mentioning the differences in terms of media and how they portray issues when they pertain to Black communities versus their white counterparts.
Yeah, and it's so true. So even in like mental health or behavioral health, when we have minority clients or patients, I find that a lot of people they don't take into account the environmental aspect of life, like you mentioned. And so yeah, that's what I was saying. So that's why I agree. I promote Black clinicians and minority clinicians, because not saying that you have to be Black to have you need to have a Black therapist if you're a Black person, or you need to have a Black social worker, but there's just something about representation and understanding someone's history and taking into account the whole entire picture. So back to what you said about like school shootings and our white counterparts, and just how it's not equal. It is not equal.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%. And in terms of the diversity, even taking it a step further than just race and saying like, maybe we need more clinicians of color or Black clinicians or whatever the case may be, we also need more diverse clinicians. So we don't need all heterosexual clinicians. There needs to be some clinicians that identify as being a part of the LGBTQ community.
That's true.
Whether they're Black, Latino, white, Asian, we need representation. So all across the board, there needs to be more Asian clinicians. Shout out to my boy Andy out in Cali. We need them Asian clinicians up in there. Southeast Asian. That's where he represents out in Cali. So it definitely just needs to be representation all across the board. Not that, again, like you said, you don't need to have a Black clinician working with a Black client. That's not necessarily the case, but there does need to be representation across the board so that we don't have these small microaggressions come up.
And there's options. I love what you said. Yes, every population needs a representative. Period. Good stuff. Any questions right now? Any questions from you guys? Auntie Sandra is giving you a lot of love right now.
Oh, I appreciate that. I saw right before that Jackie had a comment. She said she's really stuck on professional speaker.
Jackie. Yeah. So he was answering the engagement icebreaker question. If you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And he's stuck on that. Like that's and he actually has a business doing speaking. So shout out to Jackie Fowler Lewis III.
Oh, okay. All right, Jackie. I'm sorry I said she. I apologize, sir. I don't want none of that smoke he got for me over there. I don't want no parts.
Oh, Andy's on. He says, thank you for the shout out. Shout out to you. Yes. Let's see. Oh, wow. Shoshana says, let me tell you, it's also not equal in our own community. Mental health is never considered when something goes wrong.
Absolutely. That's the point that, that's the point that I was trying to make. It's not.
Let me go ahead and sip my adult drink. Dre, Walter says, what is next after graduation?
Oh my goodness, man. Mr. Larkin is always putting me on the spot. So I have given a lot of thought to doctorate programs. But to be honest, this year has just been so much information coming in at one time. A lot of the programs that I looked at said you had to have 2 years of work experience postgraduate school. So I think that's a good thing. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to fight against that. There are some programs, and particularly Clark Atlanta had a nice program that I was looking at, a PhD program. But right now, I'm really just kind of trying to sit back and find a job, maybe work for the next 2 years, and then I'll pursue the doctorate piece a little bit later. The goal was initially have the PhD by 30. But again, I don't like to use time as a standard of success or like a metric, because I feel like time is also a socially constructed idea. So I'm gonna go ahead and wait,
Absolutely.
try to work somewhere for 2 years and get my licensure so that I can be making that good 125 per session, like my girl out here in Boca.
Yes, exactly. And if you guys missed the first video, you can definitely go back to my page. It's www.facebook.com/Teshara, which is spelled Tesharia. And we spoke a little bit earlier that there are some misconceptions with the field, and you can make money. You can be a creative in the field. So don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. So you mentioned previously that you have done work in schools in a variety of ways. And so why would you say it's important for social workers to be in our communities and schools? If you can like give us one blanket statement as to why, what would that be?
Every kid in America will come through a school. Every kid will come
Mm,
through a school. So when you talk about making a large impact on people, it has to come from the school. A lot of people put a lot of onus on churches. A lot of people don't go to church. A lot of people don't go to church, and that's just the reality of it. So I think that there's a need to touch every single human that grows up in this world. When we just for a second, when we talk about suicide, working in a school, I got a chance to see suicide and suicide ideation and attempts firsthand. And so
yeah.
when we have students that are part of the LGBTQ community and they attempt suicide because they can't fit in or they're being bullied at the school, that's a piece that the social worker is there to bridge that gap. So every student needs to have a social worker in their school, and I'm a strong advocate and proponent for mental health clinicians being in schools to work with not only students but teachers. A lot of these teachers have a lot
Yes.
of trauma and a lot of things built up in them, and they're taking it out on our students the same way the police officers are. So it's definitely a need for them in schools for sure.
And one thing I'm like getting chills because I love our profession, but one of the things that I love about it is that we're not only there for the identified client like you mentioned, so like the student or the patient or whatever the case is, but our colleagues, teachers, staff, when something like a mass shooting happens that impacts the entire community, that impacts the entire school, and so that's where social workers are trained and really have the best skills at, if you will, like they are the best resource in that regard. And so I just love the fact that like if there's a crisis, if someone in Florida, it's called a Baker Act, if someone has to be placed involuntarily into treatment, that puts a lot of stress on the entire team. And so that's where social workers come in and de-escalate, or hey, let's check in, are everybody good, or can we debrief? We talk a lot about self-care. And so I love us, and we definitely need to be accessible to the
Yeah,
community.
for sure. I like the part that you mentioned again about not only working with like our identified clients, but working with everybody in the community. So, for example, in terms of a school shooting, it was a school shooting in Florida here, the Parkland shooting that happened. A lot of people think how it affects the students at the school, but it affects so many people. The
Yeah.
mailman had to seek therapy because he was traumatized and didn't know if he could go back to the school. The pizza
Mm.
delivery guy who delivered pizzas to the school often for the staff, traumatized. People who work across the street and they have friends or neighbors who went to the school and they just to see them and the trauma that they go through in the day to day is big, it's huge. So there's a need not only in the schools but all throughout the community in terms of the mental health piece.
So, so true. Arthur says every child goes to school. I love it. Plus, church people aren't trained professionals per se. Love the comment on treat the whole person. So glad social workers are in the community. Yes, retweet. So glad. Um, absolutely. Good. Do you guys have any questions? Any questions live from the viewers to Dre? Any questions? Or Dre, do you have questions for any viewers?
Do I have questions for the viewers? I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to know, one of the things that I struggled with when I was in school, I had no relationship with the social worker in my school. So that's why I'm big on having someone who identifies, who looks kind of like the students that they serve in their school. Because I don't know if we had a social worker, I'm sure we did at my school, but there wasn't someone I saw myself in. So I wouldn't feel
Mm.
comfortable going to them and talking about trauma or opening up about the skeletons in my closet. So I just want to know from the viewers, did you guys have a relationship with the mental health person at your school? Were you able to open up and talk about some of the things you went through at home with a person in your school? That's something I'm always curious about, with there being such a need for clinicians of color in schools. You can be the best clinician in the world, but if people don't identify with you, if people don't connect with you, if they don't feel like they relate with you, they're not going to open up about their trauma and things that are going on in their life. So I'm just curious to know from the viewers, have any of you guys ever been through a situation similar to me where there was things going on, you wanted to reach out, you wanted to talk to someone, but there really was like a lack of connection, so to speak?
Mm. Good. We have a couple comments, and the question on the board from Dre is, did you have a relationship with your mental health professional in your school growing up? And so let's go back to the top. Um, Candace says, and the ripple effect that it has on the entire community and adjustment for the children that are being brought up to fair school and the new rules regarding school shooting. Shoshana says, that's good, Dre. Students are much more reachable in school, and the staff member social worker can be more approachable than the pastor or the deacon, etc. That's true. Shajarian says, I agree with the social worker being there during a crisis. Our district has a crisis team, but those are the people who are students those are people who our students nor teacher knows. So, they don't know them. So they won't be able to express themselves to strangers. Our social worker is awesome and will be great during a time like that. She has relationships with everyone in the building. Um,
She or he. Let me just plug, there's
True.
some fellas out here in social work.
Y'all, yeah, y'all are very much needed. Shajani says, I do. Our social worker is always there for the students and the staff. Growing up, no, I didn't know schools even had social workers. Low key,
Wow.
I didn't
Wow.
either. I did not
Wow.
either. Candace says, no social worker in my school. Yeah.
And that's another issue that came up in terms of the research that I did this year. There is, people say, it's a lack of funding. The district doesn't have funding. We don't have funding for a social worker. But then you look and they have all these clubs and organizations and things that kids aren't even involved with. You have a robotics team, and you got two people on the team, and then I don't know. I don't even. I'll get on the soapbox. I'm not even gonna go there. But there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely money out there. There just has to be the educational piece to let people in policy know that the social worker is needed and money needs to be allocated for that social worker in the school.
Absolutely. A lot of people are saying no, I didn't have the opportunity. Fabiola, who's in LCSW, she was just on the show last week where we talked about mental illness in the Haitian community. She's in New Jersey.
Nice.
She practices with teens. And she says she did not personally have one, and that's why she tries to be there for her patients. Anna says, I had some things I wanted to talk about in my adolescence, but I didn't really consider talking to a social worker. I didn't really know that was an option. Arthur says
Mm.
that's real. A guidance counselor. She was more like a secretary. I don't know if I ever had a mental health expert in one of my schools. If I did have a social worker, I didn't know. And so that becomes a theme. Hey, Davina, welcome to the show. George had a question earlier, and so did Mike. We'll go with Mike, and then we'll go to George's question. Mike Perry says, are there a lot of Black men in your class, Trey?
Oh man, I love it. He's putting it out there. There is one other black man in the MSW program at Florida Atlantic University. Florida Atlantic University is the top three most diverse colleges in the country. Yet in the MSW program, with over 150 MSW students, there are two black men.
Mm.
Uh, so, I mean, that's a great question that Mike brings up. Shout out to Mike all the way from Atlanta checking in.
Nice. So George says, and Mike has another question, but I want to hit George before it disappears. So George mentioned, how do you feel about medication being the first method of therapy by professionals in the social work field? And I'll have you begin, and then if I have anything to add, I'll add to it.
Okay, I think oftentimes there's a discrepancy between blacks getting diagnosed with medication, being put on medication, versus when white students or children are put on medication. So, one of the things that people have to realize in terms of studying trauma, when a child is traumatized, they react and act in ways that a kid has like who is hyperactive and things like that. So it's not always just a kid is hyperactive or whatever the case may be. A lot of times there's trauma going on and the kid doesn't know how to conceal or how to deal with that trauma. So just for example, if you witness somebody get shot in your neighborhood on Sunday and then you come to school Monday, you're frustrated, you can't even really think straight because you grew up with this person, you played basketball with them, you knew this person, and then the teacher is trying to ask you about trigonometry. And so you don't know anything about trigonometry, so you act out in the classrooms in order to get kicked out because you don't want to be there. You rather not be there, and people don't know you don't know what's going on. And the more you're out of the classroom missing the academic instruction, the further and further behind you'll get, which kind of goes to the school to prison pipeline and things like that. But it's really that's a big issue. It's a big issue.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nail. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go on my soapbox. You hit it right on the nail. So my second question was, what do you think the most need is in our community? That's a really broad and interesting question.
The biggest need in our community, I think our history is the biggest need. I say that because
Mm.
I wasn't who I am today 4 years ago or 5 years ago. The way I got kind of to this journey of equity and like academic attainment is studying my history. My school didn't teach me about Malcolm X. My school didn't teach me about W.E.B. Du Bois. So when I was in college, I took African and African American studies as my minor. I had a chance to study abroad in West Africa, and I got a chance to see my lineage, my roots, where I came from. I actually had a chance to meet a queen who looked like me. That's not what they tell you
Wow.
in our history books. They don't tell you about, you're a descendant from kings and queens. And when you know that you're a descendant of kings and queens, you move different. You know what I'm saying? You just move differently. Um, your expectations become higher. You like, listen, I can do better. Martin Luther King, he did a great job. I can do better. So
Mm.
I think that history is a huge piece, a huge gap that we have. Um, I think we would do better holistically if we knew our history and where we came from. It would really change the trajectory of the Black community, and I would say even the Latino community as well.
That's so freaking good. When you know you're a descendant from kings and queens, you just move different. Yes. It's so true. Awesome. So history, you would say history is the most need.
Our
Okay.
history. We have to be making sure that we are the ones telling the story. So getting Black educators in there that understand our history did not start with slavery. When you ask kids in schools about our history, they will bring up slavery. They won't bring up scientists in Africa and dentists in Africa and doctors in Africa. They won't
Come
bring that up.
on.
They don't
Yeah.
realize that we have been sold a lie. So that is something that I would say we need to get the true history of what actually happened and how we got here, and not the whitewashed American version of our history.
I agree. Yeah. So many people don't know anything past like, oh, we started with slavery. No, sweetheart. No. But yeah. Good stuff. Let's see. I want to see if I missed anything. Hey, Ezekiel, and hello to Howard. Tonight, we're doing a special edition interview with Dre Johnson, who is a social worker, graduating with his master's in social work next Thursday. So, woot woot from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. Dre has worked in various capacities in the field of social work and has a huge passion for social justice. And so, we're just talking a little bit about the profession and about his walk and journey in it. Um, so you did research in regards to preventing gun violence and school shootings. Could you just talk a little bit of what you've seen with your research?
So the research has been The research is, as you said, about preventing gun violence in schools and talking about ways that we can be more preventative, because a lot of our systems are set up to be more reactive. If there is a school shooter on campus, all schools now have active shooter drill,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't really have ways to prevent an active shooter. So that's really what the research is about. It's a qualitative research. It's more of an exploratory research to see what social workers think in terms of how do we bridge this gap. How do we stop these school shootings from happening? How do we stop these mass shootings from happening from a mental health standpoint? Because the minute it happens, it's 99.9% of the time going to be a young white male, and then they're going to point to mental health. So how do we be preventative in terms of treating and preventing these school shootings from happening?
Mm-hmm. Prevention over intervention instead of being reactive.
I
Yes.
love it.
Henry had a really great question. So his question for you is, what do you feel can be done to help ex-felons?
Oh, so in Florida, they actually just passed a law where ex-felons can now vote. I think if anybody has seen the movie, well, the documentary 13th, it is huge. It's powerful in terms of social justice, in terms of the criminal justice field and reform, criminal justice reform. So if you haven't seen that documentary, check it out. It's a really good documentary. But what exactly was his question? I couldn't find it on the scroll. What do I think
Uh,
about?
what do you think can be done to help ex-felons?
Well, I think that's just what I just mentioned is one of those things that could be done. They should be able to vote. There's no reason that they shouldn't be able to vote once they get out. I think that it's unfortunate the way our system is set up to incarcerate explicitly young black men. And so prisons, if people didn't know, prisons are actually built based off of the number of black students that enter into the fourth grade.
Mm.
So when you know that prisons are being built based off of your demographics, someone who looks like you really have to get them while they're young and make sure that you understand. You got to teach them differently. You can't teach a young black student in an urban setting the same way you teach a white student in an in a suburban setting of
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. And again, policy and politics matter. We need to make sure that the movers and the shakers in these ivory towers understand that everybody voice matters. And
Yeah,
you can look at Meek Mill's story to kind of talk about that and social justice and criminal justice reform in terms of that piece.
nice. Hey Leanna, one of my favorite people and viewers. They are now making it possible for teachers to carry in classroom. How do we keep our students mentally able to deal with these new changes?
I want to just say that I have not heard that any teacher in any school in America is able to carry in schools. There's actually a federal law that says you can't have guns, even if you're a licensed gun owner, you can't have a gun on a school facility or at a bank or in like an airport. So those are places where right now you cannot have a gun. But there are people that are trying to say that,
Mm-hmm.
45 is saying, oh, teachers should be able to have weapons. They should be able to have guns. Absolutely not. Teachers don't even feel comfortable having guns or don't want those around. You could just think of the multitude of different issues that could occur with having guns readily available and accessible in classrooms. That's absolutely the most asinine thing I've ever heard in terms of solutions to gun violence in schools to add more guns. That's idiocracy.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were talking about the question regarding ex-felons, and you talked a little bit about policymakers and the movers and shakers. And so a lot of times these politicians, they are people with law degrees, people with business degrees. We have some social workers that are politicians and representatives
Mhm.
and that lobby. So, but for the most part, a lot of them are not. Can you discuss the importance of lobbying and advocating for policy change?
Uh, Hearing from the stories, nobody tells the story better than the person that has been through it. So when we talk about homelessness, it doesn't do the homeless community a great service if I come in and I have on a nice suit and tie and I'm talking about the homeless community. We really need to be able to pull at the heartstrings of these people that are in office. So bringing in homeless people, bringing them in.
Yes.
And when I was in New York, we did that. We had homeless people, people that are homeless. I want to make sure I put the person first. So we brought
Exactly.
in people that were homeless to Albany to lobby with us, and they got a chance to tell their story. A lot of people think people are homeless because they're lazy or they on drugs or they're alcoholics or whatever the case is. And sometimes it was one gentleman who was with us who his job downsized. He got laid off and they wouldn't give him unemployment. And so he was just really down on his luck. He didn't have any family. He was from Arizona, and he was homeless at a point in time, and he needed that support. So having him be able to come and tell his story, and other folks like him tell their stories in these policy spaces